Yeah, they got in. Hold on here. They got. The past haunts us all, whether it be a person, place, or thing. We are reluctant to let go. We call to the dead out of desperation and intrigue, searching for answers about what lies behind the shadows. We are paranormal researchers. We are Necromancers. Hello, and welcome to the Necromancer Live Show. I am your host, Justin Brown, and this is episode 28 with Matthew Jackson of Paraholics. I've been waiting to talk with Matt in length for a while now. He is an advocate and a user of the GeoBox, among other similar ITC devices. And this being an ITC show primarily, it's going to be a good show if you're interested in that sort of thing. Without further ado, we're going to bring him on over, and we're going to start talking paranormal. What's up, Matthew?
Hey, what's up, Justin?
How you doing, brother?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem, man. Like I told you before, I go through the list and say, there's Matt. It's his turn. I'll message him if he's interested. We'll have him on, and we'll get to know him as much as possible within an hour, and you never know. This show may lead into not only cross promotion opportunities, but we may actually investigate with each other on down the road, since we don't live too far from each other. At an event, we might meet up. You never know. So, I'm I'm optimistic that we will become closer and will strengthen our little paranormal community that much more just by doing these shows.
I agree, man. And I just want to let you know that out of respect, I did not put on my pajamas for this program.
I wouldn't blame you if you did. But the first thing I'd like to find out is, when did you start being interested in investigating and researching the paranormal? Did it stem from personal experience or some kind of interest? Or why don't you talk about your origins?
My origin story. It was a radioactive spider. No, it's kind of a twofold experience of mine. I cut hair for a living, and I got a job in a hair salon that was in a historic building downtown Columbus, Indiana. And this was probably back in the mid to late 90s. I'd heard stories about the building itself being haunted, which, it was kind of a novelty idea for me, so I didn't really give it a lot of credence until I was there one evening, and it was myself and the salon owner and two guests, and we were up the very front of the space, and I witnessed a hand mirror get tossed off of one of the stations, one of the stylus cutting stations, tossed like a frisbee that flew into the center of the room and broke. And, I witnessed this, I heard this, there was no one else around, there's no way I could explain. And I mean, that definitely got my attention. And so it was through a series of conversations I had with a local architect, I found out a little bit more of the history of that building. And he told me that when he was researching the original plat maps of the city, that the building that we were in was built on an old cemetery, which when you start connecting, paranormal events that happen currently to, history like that, and you start, making all those haunted connections, it really caught my attention. But it wasn't years later till I actively started researching and investigating haunted stories that I actually went to the county building myself, and I found those old plat maps. And sure enough, the guy knew what he was talking about, and it was all there. So I found that just completely mind blowing. But probably the one experience that I had that really set everything in motion more than anything was, and this is a long story that I won't go into deep detail, but it's actually a connection to my grandfather worked for a man years and years ago who this man basically had it was like, it's an unsolved murder mystery in my county where basically he and his wife kidnapped a guy, murdered him, burnt the house down, tried to say it was the husband and get all this money, right? And it was an unsolved mystery for like 10 years. And I knew in the family history that my grandpa was a friend of this man who committed this crime. And it wasn't until years later I befriended a guy who happened to live in the house where the murder took place. It's not the actual structure because they tried to cover it up with an arson, but it was the same property. And he'd always tell me that his house was haunted, and I didn't really believe him. And this was like summer of maybe 2003. And anyway, I was there, we were having a cookout, and something whispered in my ear and then threw a glass of water at my head. And it went flying by, and my buddy, who was just right across from me, he never even blinked. He just looked at me and he said, oh, that's just the ghost. That kind of stuff happens all the time. And I was gone in about 5 minutes after that. And that's when I really started reading things and researching things and started to see that there was actually a methodology behind investigating. And then there was the whole floodgate that happened when the shows hit. And, then you just start networking and talking to people, and the ball just kind of has rolled ever since.
Right, that's interesting. So you didn't really experiencing anything paranormal early on in your life, correct?
No, not really. No.
So
not that I always had an interest in, like, I always like ghost stories, monster stories, horror films. That was always right up my alley. But you're always taught that those type of things don't really exist. But when you're faced with something that really you can't explain and it catches your attention, to me, that I just found that fascinating, especially since it didn't fit into the paradigm of which I was raised, as far as like, what happens to you after you die, and when there's all these gray areas that start to develop, you're like, whoa, man, what's going on here? So
Right.
I'm a curious person, so that just made me dig deep.
That's awesome, man. I know there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens when you're faced with two opposing, ideas when it comes to something that you've been either conditioned to believe or brought up to believe. So I was wondering, how long did it take for you to start, considering the fact that, yeah, you just witnessed these things? How long did that transition period happen to where you started opening up your mind? Was it like a quick transition, or did it take a while?
Well, when the I saw the hand mirror get thrown, it really puzzled me more than anything, and I just kind of I wanted to act like it didn't happen, so I filed it away.
Hmm.
And then when the glass of water got thrown in my head and I got whispered in my ear. That one stuck with me, and I replayed that moment over and over again, and it really it really bothered me because when you have something like that happen that's that strong, you start second guessing yourself immediately. But a few years after that, I got a chance to go back into that original building where the mirror was thrown, and I got a chance to work there again. And it was when I had to go back there to work that I really started. That's when I started looking up the plat map, and I found out it was indeed there once was a cemetery there and an old church. And I also found out that as recently as the 1980s, utility companies had actually found grave remains in that city block where they thought they had to move the original cemetery, but there were still remnants of burials there. So when I start putting all that together and I start framing the story, and you kind of start to see history come alive, I find it really exciting. And at that time, I thought you could always pinpoint haunted activity to tragic history, put all together with a nice little tidy bow, and everything kind of. And since then, my opinions have evolved. But initially, that was really fascinating to me. So it was then I really started reading the books and networking with some guys up in Annapolis, and I set up our first investigation together, our formal investigation. And so probably 2007, 2008, something like that.
Awesome. Real quick before I forget, one of my group members is wanting to know if you still live in Columbus.
I actually live in Nashville, Indiana, which is near Bloomington, like where Indiana University is. So
Okay.
not too far.
He
I
lives in
still work.
Indiana, yeah. So he was wondering.
Okay, cool.
All right. So from watching your stuff and your promo videos, you look like you're definitely a nostalgic type. You love history. You don't like the throwaway culture. You're a country boy. You like that sort of thing. And when you found out, that's right. When you found out that that history is not just something you read in books, it's in the air. It's, a part of us as living entities still. It's still detectable. It's still, very much among the living. So that's when you really started to get excited. And then that comes across in your videos and your, voiceovers and how you approach it, in my opinion. So do you find that history does explain a lot of the paranormal activity that you find at these locations, or do you ever find that history is not really the cause, like something that happened in the past is not really the cause of the activity?
That's probably the single most thing that has frustrated me about the paranormal, because I liked being able to always explain, well, if this bad thing happened, so 40 years later, you still get this energy that's pent up frustration, or a glimpse of the sad thing that happened, or whatever. And the more I've delved into things, the more things started to make less and less sense. And it goes back to, I've said this a few times in some of my rants on my blog or my voiceovers, that you can go to Gettysburg and catch some really cool EVPs or the sounds of cannon fire, and you think, wow, yeah, this is where the battle happened. So I'm getting this residual or whatever, recording of that period of time, which is amazing. But then you go out into a cornfield where nothing happened and you break out a Ouija board. Next thing you know, you're talking to Zozo. And so it's kind of like whenever I have a person that is great at researching history, and she's really helped me pin down a lot of folkloric stories that we might get haunted places that you're not able to tie it to any event that actually occurred. And it kind of reminds me of the Philip experiment. I know you know what I'm referencing there. And how much of this is just brought on by our wants, our desires for these types of stories, and whatever facilitates makes those hauntings manifest, which is something that is just totally it's fascinated me and disappointed me all in one because I really love the historic part and all that and bringing that to life.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the Philip experiment because it's really psychological or parapsychological, as we like to say, and I do believe that places like urban legends, especially the crybaby bridges and stuff like that, you go out to those, and even being a seasoned paranormal investigator, you know that there is really no truth to this legend whatsoever, yet
Right.
you still experiencing things, and the origin of this phenomena that we're experiencing seems to stem from living people's psychology and their actual imagination, if you will. So there is an interesting, complex nature to what's going on. It's almost like, okay, is what am I experiencing in my house a poltergeist parapsychological thing to where we're causing some of this, or is it some kind of weird interaction with the spiritual presence, or is it Uncle Bob?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I tell you what, and the further I've gotten into this is the main reason why I tend to shy away from doing many residential cases. Because I truly believe that someone like you or someone who's really, like you said, a seasoned investigator, that expertise carries a little bit more weight than somebody that just runs into like a house and they're going to chase away a demon or whatever. But at the same time, to me, I've always felt like, it's really hard to go into it's more like a diagnostic service is what I feel like I kind of run, because it's really hard for me to go in and like take care of a situation when I feel like I fully cannot comprehend and explain how everything works. So, and when you start dealing with, people and the things they draw in just their mind and how much of this are they facilitating, it gets real messy real quick. So that's why I tend to stay more in the historic locations and trying to work and help find ways to preserve those places versus trying to be, and I don't mean this in a condescending way, but trying to be like a supernatural hero for people having unexplained events their homes. But I do that on occasion if I get asked as a favor. I'm willing to help, but that's not what I typically take.
Yeah, that's smart. A lot of people, it's just like you say, it's very difficult to explain something so complex that you've have even somewhat trouble understanding yourself, and then conveying those complexities to a resident or a person that may already have a preconceived notion of what they may be experiencing. They may think it's evil, you may think it's not. So not only do you have to explain to them what's going on and that it's not evil, you have to explain to them that, this, and that is causing it, not what they thought. So, yeah, that is very, very true in that regard. And also, like you said, it can get overwhelming. A lot of early groups, they'll try to get residential cases because they're free, and it's a field of study that they can research, and it doesn't cost anything. So that's what you start doing. But then you have to play babysitter with them. They call you. A lot of them keep calling you back, even when they move, and it can get problematic. So I agree with that 100%. But
and you run into a lot of crazy people. I mean, let's just be honest, you really do. And there are just some problems that even if it has nothing to do with anything metaphysical, there are just some things that you really can't help, and that are way scarier than an infestation Gothian demons in their house. So
Right. Right.
yeah, yeah.
So the preservation of history is definitely something to put forth effort, in my opinion, and I agree with you there. What are some of the places that you do not only research, but you put money in to help preserve historical places?
Well, I'm passionate enough about that, and I think, especially since I don't view that, particularly my role is to save people, like we were just saying. The one thing that I think the paranormal community, the biggest benefit that I wish that more communities would recognize that the paranormal community has is the ability to help save history and certain communities and towns and buildings and structures. I mean, there's so many amazing stories that we would completely lose if it wasn't for ghost stories, if it wasn't for those legends that get carried on, perpetuated. And if you give a chance to the paranormal community and allow them to come in, and it's always a fine line. It's like you don't want to stick it to the paranormal community. You want to make it so it's a win-win for everybody. So people have the opportunity, and at the same time, the structures get a chance to be preserved. I think that's one of the more important things, and that's like one of the more concrete things that we can do versus thinking that are these experts that can cross everybody over and save metaphysically and supernaturally. I mean, this is a concrete thing that we can bring and use to promote the paranormal, and in a way that's not wacky to people who don't normally appreciate our crazy hobby. So I always try to go to Waverly at least once a year because it's practically my backyard. I try any place I go. I try to leave at least a little bit of something because those places I just think it's very important. So
Well,
I don't believe in rides.
right, yeah, we've definitely been we went to Waverly last year as a group. There's some members of my group that's gone years before, and we're going back again in June. And that's definitely a place that
Yeah.
does not want to go away. It calls people to it that connect with that type of history, and it's very this is strange. My skeptical mind, right when I have these thoughts, say to myself, buildings aren't alive, Justin. That's crazy talk. But me and you both know it's
Yeah.
100% true. Not only spiritual things that may have consciousness of its own, these buildings have consciousness that is different than our human consciousness, but it's alive nonetheless in the sense of the
Mhm.
definition of what can be alive. And that's what's fascinating. And that's what I feel like when I'm, paying, $100 a person like Waverly Hills Sanatorium to go there. You're actually keeping that life form alive, and you're allowing it to grow and just stay alive. And what's interesting about doing that is it kind of says something about us as people, maybe kind of shed some light on hauntings in a way, and I'll explain why. Our nature is not to let go. A lot of us don't like to let go of things, and we like things to linger, and we want things to stay alive forever. So these places seem to be echo chambers of just that sentiment. They don't want to let go. There's whatever it is doesn't want to let go, and it just does not want to cross into what is out there next, either out of fear or stubbornness or what have you. I mean, what is your thoughts about that?
Well, I've often heard stories of places that are active, paranormal locations. And then all of a sudden, it's like they go to sleep. It's like the juice runs out or it expires, and I don't know. I mean, I've kind of, as I've grown in my thinking and my views on spirituality, because I mean, I don't see myself completely as like some scientific researcher. Like I'm going to reinvent anything with what I do. I'm more, it's kind of a personal journey that I'm trying to document this as I go, and I'm open to network and share with others and work with others and see what I can learn and glean. But there definitely seems to be, in my mind, whatever is stuck. energy wise in a certain location, whether it be residual or actually an intelligent type of presence. I don't think it's there forever, because that just it seems completely cruel. And for another, that would kind of explain how these places become like dead cells at one point. They're highly active and then they're not. I think everything, I don't think anything lasts forever. And I think things do have a chance to move on. And I don't think that's anything that we can influence personally. I think it's all, determined, based upon their attachments and the reason that they're there. And so I find it fascinating. I really do. But it's really kind of hard to explain without, maybe reading some books on Buddhism and exploring some of those type of the more spiritual angle of things. But
Right.
it's been the most complete view I've been able to map this out in my mind to make anything kind of connect.
Right. When you say connection, that kind of brings me back, to what I was saying. I do believe things don't last forever, but I think that we can connect with the past
Mhm.
and have those things manifest. And when they do manifest, sometimes they're not the cookie cutter, you know, thing that we would like to think, like, oh, it's a residual, oh, it's like a playback. We're watching a movie, we connected with Waverly Hills Sanatorium, now we're watching a movie of some tuberculosis patient. That's not always the case. Sometimes these manifestations react to stimuli. They're intelligent. So those are the things that are interesting, that don't make sense rationally, and that we need to know more about. But
Right.
what I find interesting is the fact that we go to these historical locations and can connect with them even when they feel like they're dead. Maybe they lay dormant for 10, 20, 50, 100 years. We can still arc back to them, and that's great. And now let's shift gears. Now we're talking about places. Let's shift gears into the Emmett House. We all know it burnt down, but Jeff Fent and some other ITC researchers like George Brown and the Andres box, the creator of the Andres box, they started using the material from those historical places, and it seems like that's an interesting component to the spirit communication that people like yourself are doing. Let's talk about your ideas about why boxes built out of the Emmett House and other historical places, kind of help in the ITC research.
Well, it's interesting. I met Jeff Fent. And the thing that impressed me about Jeff initially is just how passionate that guy is about, ghost hunting and research and so forth. And when he started making housings out of the Emmett House wood, I could almost hear in his voice how saddened and passionate he is about the Emmett House itself and how much that place meant to him and how much he really wanted to find a way to preserve that history and carry it forward, not really knowing if that would actually create anything different or new. So I think I was one of the first guys to jump on and get a box from Jeff after he made a couple for himself, and I got a box from him, and Andre built it out for me. I actually had a chance to go on an investigation with Jeff, and we went to the Randolph County Infirmary, and we did this little experiment where Jeff went on one side of the infirmary and I went on the other, and we turned our Emmett House boxes on, both of them built by Andre, and we did this whole experiment where, he's asking his box to find my box, and we were passing messages back and forth. And I have this documented on my Ghost versus the Box video from Randolph County Infirmary on my YouTube channel. And basically everything he told his box to say was relevant to the Emmett House, which all those names I didn't really know and have referenced in my mind. And everything he told my box to say, my box said. And the only thing that I told his box to say was my son's name, which is an unusual name. It's Charlton. And sure enough, it came through on his box. So to me, that was absolutely mind blowing. And I was able to acquire that Emmett House box that Jeff had that night because his box was just so talkative. And it's kind of strange because no matter where I take that particular box, whether it be a cemetery or another location, I recently had it at the Monroe House. It's like I can turn it on and I can kind of connect with whatever is there. But as soon as I bring up anything related to the Emmett house itself, the names just start rattling. Emma, James, Avery, Lisa, Louisa. I mean, it all comes through, and especially Avery, which that's another Emmett house, kind of story. But it's almost like I can almost work with them to help me in the location I'm at. I can say, hey, Avery, tell me, who's here at this location? How many people are here? And, and I get names, and, I can have one box on and I can say, how many people are in this room? And the box will tell me 6. And then I can turn on my Emmett House box and ask how many people are there, and they'll say 8. It's like it upped it by 2, like every time, like, did that box draw in 2 more people? And I'm not saying the box is haunted, but it seems to be some sort of like beacon for whatever energy was connected to that location. And I can't prove any of it, and I sound batshit crazy when I say it, but I mean it's really fascinating. I mean, enough to where it's got my attention, and it blows my mind because it happens every time.
It may be a conduit. It may be something to focus energy or channel the energy, maybe from the location or other spiritual energies that are connected with the location or deal with the location. That is an interesting theory. And when I do paranormal research, I always constantly try to find ways to actually come up with a working hypothesis and a way to experiment so you can prove something. And some of the things I've been talking about, Jeff and other ITC researchers, there's a few things you can do, especially with the geobox and the similar boxes. There's these things called FM transmitters, and you can get an AM transmitter too. But if you ever seen like a Halloween setup to where you stick a mic into the FM transmitter and the receiver's somewhere like in one of the props outside, and you can speak into the mic, and it's like the voice is projecting from the prop, the Halloween prop. Well, you can take that, plug your geobox in, for example, and record what's coming into the geobox on one side of the FM transmitter. Okay, and then transmit the audio to the receiver and hook up a recorder there as well. And so there's 2 theories main theories that seem to be prominent. There's one that says, okay, it uses the audio bits to manipulate that internally, and then the other one is an external manipulation where it modulates the radio frequencies and whatnot. And I know there's some certain things about the geobox that may allow for other manipulation, and we can talk about that. But you can see if it's somewhere in the FM modulation between the transmitters. If you can cross-check what's coming in through the box before the transmitter and then after and get a manipulation on the cross-check, then you can prove the RF modulation hypothesis. And the other way to do the internal one is another one that I did at the beginning of the show, where I just take 2 SB7s, sync them, run them into a Tascam DR40 or a similar recorder, scan them identical, and then cross-check each one to see if one's different from the other, see if they're manipulated internally. And there's 2 experiments that I want to get off the shelf this year and get into you guys' hands so you can start doing some of this if you're interested. So there are ways to prove some of your guys' theories, and I want to make my contribution to the research field in that way, because if we can find some type of proof of manipulation, I think that would be wonderful.
Question: have you ever been on a location and you're doing an EVP session side by side somebody, and you both have recorders in your hand, even identical models, and when you do your playbacks, one of you catches an EVP and the other one doesn't, or you catch EVPs at the same moment and each of them are different? Have you ever had that happen?
Not at
that's happened. I'm just curious if that's happened to you. So,
well, I don't know. I can't remember a time where we caught something anomalous at the same time, but they're different. But maybe, but I cannot remember. But what we do is we run a RVPR setup, which uses multiple mics running into the one recorder, and we try to get audio to show up just on one of the mics and not at the others. So that's kind of a similar way where you cross-check the camera audio with the recorder, or if you have the recorders, like you said. So that actually happens rarely, but we do get that. But catching something different at the same time, I don't know if that has happened. If it does, it's more rare than the latter.
Yeah. It definitely blew my mind when that happened. It was last February when Anthony England came over from England. Who names himself after their own country? I mean, I'm not like Matthew America, but anyway. Uh, anyway, we were doing an EVP session at a location, and this goes back to things being manipulated internally. That's what made me think of this, and it was just one of those moments that really had me scratch my head because that never happened before. We were doing our EVP session at the same time, and we were at a house called the Toner Maley Mansion in Edinburgh, Indiana, which is just an amazing place. And the question that was asked was, there's two different families that had this house, the Toners and the Maleys, and we just asked, are you a Toner or a Maley? And I played back my recorder, and plain as day it says Toner. And Anthony played back his, same model, same make, everything, played back his, and it said, hello, I'm American. Which was really fascinating because it was at the same moment, and it was almost like it was introducing himself to England, to Anthony, and it recognized that he was not American. And so it was just kind of a wow moment. So I was just curious. But to us, it almost seems like it had to been manipulated internally because that was nothing that seemed to be like heard, or I would have thought they'd been more the same, you know?
Right, and the one hypothesis that we're trying to prove or get supporting evidence of right now is the manipulation may be occurring in the transducer, where the microphone component that transfers acoustic energy and compression of the air into an electric signal, either through electromagnetic interference or manipulation. Okay, and there's a way to prove that with the stuff that we do. So if you're interested in that hypothesis, you can check that out in your own time. But there's other, possible things as well, because it's not always the same physics, because some transducers and microphones are different. So you have to come up with variances in the hypothesis. But it's interesting when you say that is there's a lot of beliefs out there that spirits will connect with an individual and that individual alone. Whatever the reason may be, they find a connection with them. So it sounds like it's possible that one entity found a connection with the other fellow that you're with, and one found a connection with you, two different types of spiritual energies.
It's possible. I mean, I'm way better looking than Anthony in the dark, though, so I don't know why anyone would even bother talking to him, but whatever. That's another show.
But I try very hard. I know that most of what we do is we're sharing our experiences rather than doing actual legitimate science, because let's face it, turning the places we go into a laboratory and doing the things that are required by the scientific community to have us do is outside our knowledge, our ability to know, and our resources. We can't afford, I don't know about you, but I can't afford millions and thousands of dollars to put into this stuff. I mean, we're trying. I know we're building scientific devices all the time and trying to develop them and deploy them in the field, but really all we're doing most of the time is just documenting our experiences and, conveying to the folks that follow us, this is what I believe, because a lot of it's faith-based.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I'm always hesitant to ever use the word evidence. I always view it as more we're like collecting data. And, you like to think if you step back and if you look at this huge wall of data that, people that go into these locations, and, some do it better than others, but try to carefully document as much and as best as they can the strange things that we don't seem to explain. You like to think you could step back and look at this big wall and think, wow, man, that is really starting to set a pattern in a story and really build more of a credible argument towards the phenomena that we experience. But yeah, it's just really tough when you can't get the replication and everything that science actually demands in order to say that it's been proved and to say you have concrete evidence. So it's interesting, but at the same time, I hope that people that are trying, and striving and working hard and taking it as serious as what you do, that you at least have some fun and enjoy the ride too, because it's an incredible place to be, an incredible thing to do. And you meet all kinds of fun people along the way and get into some amazing places. And I think that's a big part of, what makes this appealing beyond, a thrill that you might get at the same time.
Absolutely. Why don't you break out one of your boxes and let's start talking about it in depth?
Okay, I'll grab my Emmett House box.
I'm sure everyone watching now, all 24 people, would love to hear you talk about this thing and maybe even hear it.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay, so this is made from a beam that survived the fire that consumed the actual Emmett itself. And Jeff made the housing, and Andre from Andre's Ghost Boxes, Andre Wooler, he put the internals in. It's a FM sweeping device that has a little bit of echo to it. And he has a really unique tuner built that kind of has a fun cadence that once you get used to listening to it, sounds really unique. And when voices come through, they come through really, really clear. So it's cool. So let me turn it on.
Sure.
All right. Sweep on high speed.
Everybody in the comments, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read them all, but it's going crazy in there. If you have any questions for me or anything, just message me after the show, or have one of my group members or moderators message me or something.
Try and get the sweep to speed down. The other really odd thing about this box, and I'm working on a video that I recorded at the Monroe House, and it's really clear there. For whatever reason, when this box starts to connect, it's like the spirits themselves almost have the ability to either slow down or speed up the sweep to what they need. And it sounds really weird, but you'll be doing a session and it'll slow way down and then it'll speed way up. And at first I thought it was like a battery issue, but there have been times I've been like, can you speed that up? And by golly, it'll speed up. And you can ask it to slow down, and the sweep will slow down. It's a strange box, man. I've never worked with anything like it.
That is interesting.
Yeah, my son.
It's your turn.
There, that sounds more normal. Say hi to Justin.
Thanks.
You hear the cadence to it though?
No.
Anyway, that's a sample of what the box sounds like. Is it fast? I've kind of found that some of the more effects that the box might have to it, like echo and reverb, the slower sweep I tend to prefer. And if there's not those types of effects, I find that the faster sweeps are more effective. And I think that those effects don't make a box better or worse, but I think they make them easier for us to listen to. I think it helps us more than it helps whatever may be on the other side of the veil, so to speak.
It makes sense, because if it says something quick, you'll hear it 2 or 3 times versus just the once.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So anyway, so that's that box there.
If you want to show off the other boxes that you use, go ahead, because I'm sure people will be interested.
All right. And this is another box from Andre. This is his AGB 3. These things are beasts, man. I freaking love these boxes because they're so portable. And I live out in the boonies, and I can always get a with this particular box. It's an AM or FM sweep as well, and there's no effects to it, nothing like that. But they work really well. And this is one that I usually have best results if I have very fast speed. And I'll turn it on so you guys can hear it. The way he has it set up, I mean, you can get like a mute button on it, which these things can be kind of loud. So it's nice to be able to get your question asked and then see if you get any type of reply. But it's our song, Justin. It's our jam, buddy.
How did they know?
And then it'll start sweeping here in a second as soon as it warms up. This is like a box this is my favorite to walk around a cemetery with, because like I said, the portability of it, and it just seems to connect no matter where you take it.
Yeah, it's like the size of an SB11.
Yeah, it fits in your hand, I think, maybe a little bit better, but it has a powerful speaker to it as well, though. I mean, I definitely like that. But anyway, just handy. And that's one thing with these ITC guys, man. I know that they don't always see eye to eye, but I have gained much appreciation for all their various talents. And I think there's a place for every single one of them. And I try to utilize and network and work with as many of these guys as I can, because they all bring different strong suits and different theories to the table. And I think they're all worth checking out. The other box I'm waiting on, one of my other favorite boxes is the PRD 1000 that is made by Chicago Spirit Wave, Andrew Openland. Mm-hmm. I love that box, and he's actually outfitting one of those with his Radio Spectre right now, and I should have that fairly soon, which is more of the silent AM sweep and a PRD with the PRD 1000 effects. So I really tried to. I always say that these boxes have different personalities, and usually what I mean by that is just their sound is so distinct, and some people can tune their ears certain boxes better than others, and so I think all these guys are worth following and checking out, and trying to help them, encourage them further their work, because like I said, they just really bring different things to the table that might work for some and it doesn't work for others, but I think they're all valuable in their own right.
Right. You definitely want to keep an open mind and try to do proper research. You don't want to close your research off just because you want to, choose to believe only in this guy's work and not the other. I agree with that. I know that this is not going to be the greatest question you like to answer, but what is your belief or theory on how these boxes are able to communicate with spirits or energies?
That's $1 million question, I honestly, there have been moments where, especially with like the AGBX3, I mean, I totally feel that they're able to manipulate the whatever is coming in from the station. And it's almost like, I'm sure you're familiar with like EchoVox, the app from Big Beard, Danny. How it throws out, all this like alphabet soup, and the theory is take it and arrange it and send it back through and create speech. And I think there's a little bit of like the radio station noise and snippets that they're able to. I mean, if they're in between the radio station and the radio, they're going to pick it up before the radio picks it up. And does that give them an opportunity to kind of reconfigure what they need to actually get a message through? I think it's possible, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of validity in the white noise and the in-between static that they're able to use as material to construct speech. So I think it kind of works both ways, because I've had it happen both ways, and I've seen guys that have taken radios and they've tuned them into stations and they've recorded those stations, and they've been able to compare that with responses they've gotten in those moments from ghost boxes, and nothing from any of those stations matches up to what comes through the box. So I think it can be either way, and I don't think it matters if you're using an SB7 that's been over by a car, or a Geo box that you paid a lot of money for, or whatever. I mean, I think you can get responses that are just as valid through any of them, and I don't promote one above the other. I mean, I have my personal preferences, but that's based upon my experiences and my personal ear. But yeah, I don't think there's a way to fully define and explain how it happens, but I think there's probably multiple ways, and they're probably correct.
Well, like I was saying, I believe that there's ways to start to test and mark things off and consider. I do believe that it is some sort of modulation, but the question is it external or internal modulation? Okay, now FM modulation or frequency modulation is tougher. And the reason why it's tougher is because like something like magnetic cannot modulate the signal as easy as it can FM or AM rather, because all the research I did on radios states that we switched to FM just because we got tired of electrical storms messing up our AM radio transmissions. A lightning bolt will modulate an AM carrier signal and just trash it, where an FM signal, it can pierce and penetrate through all of that. So a lot of people believe that AM is better because spirits can modulate it, and that is interesting, but you can test that. Okay, but it takes great effort to test it. You can't just walk out there with the radio, sit there, and do that. You have to come up with some insane setup, and you have to do science. And it is, tedious, boring, hard work. And you're not having a lot of fun because of that. And I think that's why it's not very popular. But I try to do that. Now, when it comes to the FM and AM transmitters I was talking about before, you can use those to try to see if you can get manipulation from the transmitter and the receiver in your immediate area. So
Right.
that is one way. And I'm going to release all of that information out there for guys that are interested in doing that research. And it could be internally as well. But when you want to think if it's manipulating or modulating it, the only thing we can do is think in terms of what we know, which is the physics that we know. Now, the definition of paranormal is the outside of the definition of science. So it may not be something that we can understand using science and physics. So we need to consider that as well. But it's always an interesting question because we're trying to understand, but do you think that we're going to be able to understand? Do you think people like me and you are doing the work we need to do to help others understand how it's done?
I think probably you more so than me, because I listen to the experiments that you're running. I find it very interesting. I think guys, like what you're doing. I think what you'll ultimately accomplish is you'll help eliminate some of the possibilities, which will help narrow down the theories. But as far as like ever fully completely defining it, as in wind up on the cover of Time magazine because you've proven it, I doubt if that would happen in our lifetime. But I think you can definitely contribute to narrowing down, like I said, some of those theories. So I don't think it's a fruitless work. You know what I mean?
Right. I agree with you.
Yeah. I applaud you on that.
Well, I appreciate it, but it feels like it's great to hear you say that it's not a fruitless endeavor, because sometimes it just feels like it, and
yeah, it is. I mean, I'm more of a guy who, like I said, I love the history, I love the research, I love the experience and trying to make sense of it. But sometimes it feels like you're throwing spaghetti at a wall, and let's just see what sticks. And when something does stick, you find it fascinating, you explore it, and then you go and you try that at the next location, and the noodle doesn't stick. So the same noodle, So
Right.
it's constantly. Sometimes you feel like you're chasing your own tail, but at the same time, It's just like infrasound. I've been on locations where people have experimented with infrasound, to see if that amps up any type of activity. And I've had places that seem to be active. You do some infrasound, and next thing you know, it's completely dead. Like nothing happens. Like it cleansed the place, and it's totally quiet for the rest of the night. And then we did an infrasound experiment one time at the Monroe House, and I saw people right in front of me get so nauseous that they had to go outside and get physically ill. People got burned. People got scratched. All this happened right in front of me. And was that amped up due to the infrasound experiment? I have no idea. I mean, you can't really prove it. But at the same time, I found it interesting that I've been to previous places, done similar experiments, and nothing happened. And for whatever reason, that night seemed to be completely agitated. And those other things happened. So I don't know.
I do know that people react to infrasound in different ways. Some people are more sensitive to it than others. Then that might be an explanation.
As far as like the nausea, I agree. But when you see people get scratched and burned, that is a physiological reaction.
Right.
When you see somebody and all of a sudden they go, "Pow!" and they grab themselves and you put the camera on them and their neck is on fire. Get her,
Yeah, that's very interesting. Before I forget, there's a viewer that asked the question in chat that I've not noticed before, so I want to make sure I get her question. Julie Burton's asked, do you feel you get more activity in places where people lived or where they died? Have you ever tested readings in a hospice building?
I've been into some like poor farms, county poor farms. Those were kind of like maybe you could kind of call that a long-term hospice type situation.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of activity in those types of places. I've never, hospitals. I mean, I've been in lots of places where people have died, but nothing ever specifically like a hospice center. That would be interesting, though.
I think there's two different types of energies when it comes to that. I think when dealing with living people and the parapsychology thing, you'll get different type of phenomena like the poltergeist type things. And when you're like, if you go to Waverly Hills, for example, where a lot of people may have died, you'll get slightly different things. More of the shadow people and, sounds of people coughing in rooms and you can't find where that's coming from, and stuff like that. So that would be my quick answer to the question. But, it really depends on a lot of factors, I would say.
Yeah. I've been in some residential cases where, things happen that are more of like a poltergeist activity, but I've been in empty places where doors have slammed right in front of me too. So, I think, I don't know, when there's living people that are like currently actively involved, I think that's just a little bit more of a wild card because, you don't know if they're dabbling or if it's the history or the soil, or there's just so many more factors that can really play into that.
Right. Well, Matt, I could sit here and do this for hours, but we're coming up on an hour, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the show and just giving your insight and sharing your experiences and your ideas and your paranormal work. I really, really appreciate it, and I just don't take it for granted whatsoever.
Hey, I appreciate it too. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on, and I hope people watch the interview and enjoy it, and they continue to follow your show. And if they get extremely bored one night, they can log on to my stuff and check out some of my views and experiences. So,
well, I have. Go ahead.
I just want to give a shout out to the people that helped me and helped me with Paraholics and help gain me access to various locations, and also the guys like Andre and George Brown and Andrew Openlander and those guys who continue to support me and help me get a hold of some of their fun devices that I get to go out and make some cool videos with and try to get some awesome responses. So those guys are integral to what I do as well.
Yes. Before we start plugging Paraholic stuff. Definitely check out Matt Fent's stuff, George Brown, and even Andre's box stuff. Even Openlander definitely has some things that are going on in the ITC field, and researching all those people will definitely lead you down the paths of other ITC researchers as well. So the community is actually vast and ever growing. And there's a lot of good people out there are willing to help, answer questions, and support you and everybody else. But I have all of Matthew, uh, his website, his YouTube channel, his social media links, all in the cards in the description of this video. But let's let him tell you how to get a hold of all his paranormal work on the internet.
Basically, the word Paraholics is going to get you to everything associated with me, whether it be Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. You can find me in all those places. Also Instagram. Long story short, I went by crazy moniker early on. I started a paranormal parody thing where I called myself Evil Ogleville, and so sometimes you can even find a lot of my stuff under the name Ogleville. And I also want to encourage people to read books. Watching videos is fun and all that and entertaining, but I'd like to give a little plug to my friend April Slaughter, who is a fantastic ITC researcher. Her book, Reaching Beyond the Veil, is great. The works of Troy Taylor, fantastic. There's just so many talented, wonderful people out there that you can. It's best to arm yourself with some knowledge from experienced people before you start, running around the dark with a flashlight. So I encourage people to check out people that are way smarter than I am, but I appreciate the opportunities that I do get.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks again for coming on the show. Hopefully, sometime this year, we'll either meet up at an event or possibly go check something out together. But hopefully that comes, because you are a super laid back, down to earth guy that would just seem like you would have a bunch of fun with. And I hope that happens.
Hey, me too, Justin. I appreciate it, buddy.
All right, man. You get some sleep, and hopefully we will talk again soon.
Yep, sounds good, man. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You have a good night.
All right, you too. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, well, there you have it, Matthew Jackson of Paraholics. Check him out. All of his social media links, his website, and YouTube channel is linked in this video. Go subscribe right now. Subscribe to his mailing list if he has one. I'm not sure if he does, but just follow his work. It is actually rewarding to watch some of his stuff. Just on his individual and unique take on the paranormal is just excuse enough to go check it out. But next week, Wednesday, 9 p.m. EST, we're going to have Brad Streets of Cincinnati Paraforensics joining us. Same bat time, same bat channel, and check us out and enjoy all the paranormal talks that we have on this YouTube channel and the Necromancer live show. We try to get a mix of people in here, so it's just not a stagnant one view look and interview of the paranormal. So if you are interested in being interviewed on the show, send me an email at justinbrowninterfacedeath.net or message me on Facebook. There is a million ways to do so, but we're going to end the show with a social screen and a little pluggy McPluggerson here. If you want to support Interface Death and the Necromancer live show, you can do that through not only Super Chat, which Scotty does almost every show, which is awesome, but you can do it through Patreon. Once a month, you can pledge $1 or more to Patreon at patreon.com at Support Interface Death. There is some rewards depending on how much you pledge on Patreon. T-shirts, DVDs, and even some other cool stuff. So check that out. Check out Necromancer Show on Facebook, and check out Interface Death on Twitter and Instagram as well. And always, you can check us out at interfacedeath.net. We always shout out our Patreons at the end of the show. This week, we still have Matt and Clay Borman still pledging, which is freaking awesome. We love to see Matt and Clay supporting us through Patreon, and Scotty supporting us through Super Chat through the show. Thanks, guys, for joining me every week and tuning in. I love you very much, and you mean a lot to me. All the support and all the love we get in the chat on the show every week is just freaking awesome. I love cross-promoting. I get to, see some of the people that follow Matthew, and the viewers from my show get to know Matthew a little bit better as well. So that's the main purpose of the show. Stick around for a few minutes. Some of the promotional stuff I got. As always, you guys take care and stay warm, and I'll see you next time.
Been associated with the school?
We got the school in March of 2017, so